All right, the children can be dismissed at this time. Join me in the Gospel of Matthew, please, chapter 11. We'll read our passage in a few moments. Genesis chapter 2, the creation account. God had created with the spoken word everything. And then he said, let us, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Have you ever wondered what that means? What do you think of when you think of God's image? Many view God and Christianity in general as kind of a Mother Teresa, heavy on grace and giving, gentleness, goodness, love, and all of those things are true. But even most of the pictures you'll find of Jesus kind of illustrate these qualities, grace and giving and gentleness and tenderness. And while those are an accurate picture, they're not the whole picture. There's an awful lot more to God's image. Let's go back to that phrase. Let us make man in our image after our likeness. The rest of that verse says this, and let them have dominion. The word dominion, rada, means conquer, subjugate. There's a distinctly powerful part of God's nature that he instilled in mankind. It goes on a few verses later, it says, so God created man in his own image. Do not miss this. Male and female created he them. This seems to imply that when God fashioned Adam, and then out of Adam he fashioned Eve, that there are qualities about God that we would consider, and I hate to use labels, but there are going to be what we would call perhaps not necessarily feminine qualities, but gentler, gracious, loving qualities that are more reflected in the female nature. But there are also going to be masculine qualities of strength and courage and daring that perhaps would be more reflective of the male character. But it seems in the last century particularly, and frankly in the last couple of decades, there has been an intentional feminization of the masculine role in our society. This devaluing of masculine qualities leaves many men uncertain or even ashamed of how God made them. One example, for instance, is both men and women have estrogen, but women have far more estrogen than men. That's why they're soft. Aren't we grateful for that, men? Amen. Men have almost 100 times the amount of testosterone as the average woman. But the testosterone makes men's muscle more dense, makes his ego more large. 1976, Bruce Jenner was the epitome of masculinity. He won the gold medal for as a decathlete, 10 events. There is no more grueling Olympic feat than a decathlon. 10 events. Now he's Caitlin.
That's been airbrush.
I was Googling something this morning on my computer. I came up, I saw this picture. The 2017 Teacher of the Year. The one person in the whole education system of America that's held up as a model for our young people is Nikos, I'm not even going to pronounce that name. He's a gay teacher in Rhode Island. The black fan is his lovers. He was told by the Secret Service, please don't use the fan during the photo shoot. And kind of as an act of defiance, he struck that rather interesting pose. Something is happening. And this is the teacher who, by the way, among other things, was selected because of his awareness, helping the community be aware of gay and lesbian and the bathroom issues. And he was selected out of thousands and thousands of teachers in America, the 50 state teachers. And he was selected out of all of America to represent what we want to communicate to our young people as a model. This cultural confusion has inevitably and inexorably found its way into the culture of the church in subtle ways, that even I wasn't particularly aware of until I started looking. According to Biola Research, Holly, a woman wrote this, by the way, and the research is called The Feminization of the Church. It shouldn't be a surprise if we were to count how many women are here and how many men there would. If our church is an average church, there'd be far more women than men. They outnumber the men in the church. They are generally more faithful to their churches and to their ministries and more committed than their male counterpart. 23% of women attend their church without their husband being present. As a natural result, many of the church ministries are geared towards women, particularly middle-aged and older women, and children. Women tend to prioritize things like security, comfort, peace, nurturing, healing, relationships, all wonderful things. And by the way, all aspects of God's nature and God's priorities, yes? But women, these are the things that they value, and therefore since they make up most of the people who minister in churches, much of the culture in the average church focuses on these qualities. These are important qualities, and they're qualities everybody wants to some degree. Since these are legitimate needs, churches naturally seek to meet these needs, and they focus on these particular dimensions of God's nature: relationships and peace and grace and healing and forgiveness and love, and these are all wonderful things. Amen? But this kind of focus often leaves men to reach the conclusion that church is the place I go to learn how to be nice. Forgive me, I don't mean to be silly, but to get in touch with my feminine side. Or in an essence, to tame some of those more masculine qualities that God built into a man. While women tend to respond to nurture, healing, peace, men naturally respond to challenge, to risk, to competition, to conquest. Have you ever gone shopping with a man?
We are hunting.
These different strengths and perspectives often are viewed as uncomfortable or even detrimental in some churches. I know we have a lot of teachers in this classroom who are generally better behaved in a classroom, the little boys or the little girls? The masculine attributes appear to conflict with we'll call them the more gentle aspects of God. But both of them are God. As a result, many times the needs or the environment and where men feel comfortable and challenged and challenged to grow are minimized by churches. Folks, there is a distinctly dangerous dimension to God's nature, and by the way, to man's nature too. Hebrews chapter 12 says, "Let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire." Hebrews 10 tells us it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Zephaniah chapter 3 says, "The Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty, Gibor, a powerful warrior." But notice there's the other dimension. He will save. He will rejoice over thee with joy. He will rest in his love. He will joy over thee with singing. Do you see the beautiful blend of God's nature? He's a conquering, powerful warrior, but he's a tender lover. He's a gracious forgiver. Jesus on Palm Sunday, remember, fulfilling the prophecies of Zechariah, "Behold, your king comes to you lowly, sitting upon the colt of a fowl, the colt of an ass." But what did he do next? He went in, he saw the money changers and the hypocrites in the temple. He made a cord and he kicked over the tables and let them have it. This is the same Jesus, the same day. You see, the nature of God is balanced. Sometimes our natures are not so much balanced. Revelation chapter 5, John is taken up into heaven, and he sees events of the future that are going to happen during the tribulation period. And there's a book, it's literally the title to the earth, and it has 7 seals. And an angel cried, "Who is worthy to open the book and let the seals, or open the seals. And John said, no one was found worthy in heaven or on earth. And I wept much because no man was found worthy, strong, powerful enough to open and read the book to look thereon. But the angel said, weep not, behold, notice this, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, hath prevailed to open the book. And beheld, lo, in the midst of the throne and the four beasts, in the midst of the elders, what did John see? A lamb, as it had been slain. Again, the balance between the power and the strength and the might and the authority and the gentleness and the sacrifice and the love and the grace epitomized in Jesus. Folks, God is sometimes like a Mother Teresa, and I use that term carefully because I think the world acknowledges her as sacrificing and giving and gracious. But sometimes he's like William Wallace. For those of you who don't know who William Wallace was, he was a freedom fighter from Scotland in the later part of the 1200s, the 13th century. And in a day when the other lords of the land were compromising for their own benefit, this particular scene in the movie Braveheart, they're all gathered to fight, but it's all a game. And the King of England was going to enrich the nobles if they just go home. And of course, he was going to lie about it. And while they're going to do this, William Wallace is seeing this is history repeating itself. They're just going to sell us for their own benefit. And he turned to the man and said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to pick a fight. And he did pick a fight, by the way. Now go to our passage in Matthew chapter 19, or chapter 11. Notice what Jesus said. Pick up reading with me. Verse 7. As they depart, now he just got informed that John the Baptist was beheaded. Do we know why John was beheaded? He boldly confronted King Herod's immorality, and eventually it cost him his head. And Jesus says this, as they departed, those were the messengers that told him. He said to the multitude concerning John, what went ye out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken with the wind, somebody that's unflexible? What went you out, or flexible and adjusting to political winds? What went you out to see? A man clothed in soft raiment? Behold, they that wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what went you out to see? A prophet? Yea, I say unto you, more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare thy way before thee. Verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist. Jesus is saying, if you want to know the greatest man, John epitomized the greatest man. He then says, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. But the next thing he said was alarming. I've never heard a message on it. It's one of those passages that we just scratch our head and read over. This is it. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence. Jesus says, I'm come. Remember, he said the gates of hell are not going to prevail. But when Jesus came with God's true, complete message of grace and forgiveness, the Pharisees clung to their traditions and eventually had Jesus put to death. But notice what he said, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence. The word violence, biazo, press into, crowd, seize. People have to reach for it and long for it and work for it. He's talking about recognizing in the culture of religious tradition that Jesus is coming representing God. And those who are going to find their way to God are going to have to, forgive the expression, fight a little bit for it. Comes from the word bia, the vital force. Something in our hearts reaches out for something of great value in the face of incredible opposition, is what he was saying. And the violent, biastes, the energetic, those that are motivated, take it by force. This is in the context of what a man is. What the greatest men are men who are willing, in spite of the obstacles, in spite of the cultural, political, or winds of his day, are willing from their heart to recognize what's right and press towards it and even fight for it. This is a very uncomfortable concept to modern Christianity and modern men. If you read the Gospels and you read it carefully, Jesus never ignored the needs of women, did he? The woman with the issue of blood, the Syrophoenician woman with the demon-possessed child, the woman taken in adultery, Mary Magdalene. Jesus loved ladies and he ministered to their needs. But where did Jesus focus? He invested most of his time in men. He called the 12 apostles. He called 70 men. He sent them out 2 by 2. It seems like our modern churches are completely opposite of Jesus' pattern. And by the way, this is still the scriptural pattern. I mentioned to you last week, 2 Timothy chapter 2 and chapter 3. Paul told Timothy, be strong. Be a man. Be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to what? Other strong men, faithful men, who will be able to teach others also. Thou therefore endure what? Hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. It was definitely a not ignoring the needs of the women. It was a woman, his mother, Timothy's mother and grandmother, that introduced him to Jesus Christ. But Paul did not appeal to Timothy's gentler side. He said, find men who are willing to stand and learn and get equipped, and when necessary, fight the powers of darkness that are attacking their families and their societies, and men who are willing to invest in the lives of other men. By minimizing the masculine strengths, we often downplay a significant force for God and for good. I didn't know this statistic. When a mother comes to Christ, a woman who's a mother comes to Christ, gets born again, and gets excited about the things of God, her family follows her on an average of 36% of the time. When a father comes to Christ and really connects with God's passion and purpose, his family follows him to Christ 93% of the time. I do not mean to minimize the influence of mothers, but we have neglected too long and to too large of a degree the impact of fathers. Jesus is the personification. Hebrews chapter 1 says, God, who at sundry times in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us. He is the express image. He is the brightness of his glory. Jesus is the brightness of God's glory, the express image of his person. Character is the Greek word, where we get the Hebrew word, or the English word, character. Jesus most clearly and accurately reflected the character, the nature of God, and upholding all things by the word of his power. That's Jesus' power, the creator. When he had by himself purged our sins, the lamb that died in our place, he sat down on the right hand of the majesty of God on high. In John chapter 1, he says, he came unto his own in verse 12, but his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, which were born not of the will of men, nor the will of flesh, but born of God. And we beheld his glory. This is the glory of the Creator in John chapter 1. We beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Over the next several weeks, I hope, and I'm asking you to pray for me as I do it, because it's an uncomfortable topic. I hope to inject a little testosterone back into the church. Testosterone is a dangerous thing, right? I have 6 boys. And there's not constantly, but regularly, the evidence of an overdose of testosterone. Now, Jesus said, I say unto you about John, that of all the men ever born of a woman, there has not been a greater than John. John, the strong, the countercultural, the confrontational, I'm going to stick my chest out and I'm going to point my finger in your face, King Herod, and I'm going to tell you you're sinful and God's going to hold you accountable. But that's in chapter 11. Then Jesus turned to the hypocritical scribes and Pharisees, and they condemned him. And then he mentioned the different cities that he had ministered in who had rejected him. And he said, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for you. Why? Because I'm telling you the truth and you're not You're elevating your comfort and your prestige and your prominence in society above the truth of God. But how does he close this chapter? Again, I'm trying to illustrate the beautiful blend of God's nature. Ho, everyone that is weary and heavy laden, come unto me, and I will give you what? Rest. Again, it's not as simple as female and male, but gentleness. I'm safe. You can come to me with your hurts, with your disappointments, with your confusion. I will give you peace. I will give you rest. Then he says what? Take my yoke upon you. Now that's a bit of a masculine term. I got a job for you to do, but I'm going to work with you. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. And then he goes back to this side a little bit. I am meek, praus. I am gentle and lowly, and you'll find rest for your souls. But so many times men read this or see this aspect of Jesus and they said, that's just weak. Folks, Jesus did not say, I am weak. He said, I am meek. Meekness is not weakness. Where do you think the term gentleman came from? In our culture, over the years, we've associated with the feminine, but a gentleman was a strong soldier, a warrior who knew how to treat women and children with gentleness. It was a safe, descriptive term. Meekness is not weakness, but strength that's been controlled. Your strength, my strength, under God's control. Are you willing, men, to put your strength under God's control and fight for your faith? Fight for your family. In Braveheart, William Wallace, and I know Braveheart is a story, but it's based on historical facts. He was challenged. He wasn't the guy in charge. He was a lower nobleman. He wasn't a count or anything like that. He wasn't benefiting from the bribery of the English king. But when the Scottish king died, the English usurped and the authority. He came in and basically says, I'm here to help you find a king. And then he took over Scotland. And William Wallace stood up and said, this is wrong. Historically, he reintroduced something that the Romans brought in called prima nocta, which was the lords would have the first night. It goes back thousands of years, way back to ancient, Nimrod practiced it, historians tell us, where the royalty would have take the virginity of the girls on their wedding night. And this was just one of many ways in which the men of Scotland had been beaten down. And the nobles of the land, most of the men were not nobles, they were serfs, which meant they lived on the nobles' land and they farmed and worked the nobles' land. And if they didn't support the nobles, they would be kicked off of their land and they would starve. So it was a horribly corrupt system. In the movie, William Wallace challenged and inspired Robert the Bruce, which was a nobleman, to join him and get in the fight. But Robert was convinced to betray William in order to benefit his own pocket. When his father, when that happened, his father said, it's okay, son, one man dies, but look at all the benefit, look at all the power and land you get. And this was his response. Lands, titles, power, I have nothing. Men fight for me because if they do not, I throw them off of my land and I starve their wives and children. Those men fought and bled for William Wallace. He fights for something that I never had. And I took it from him when I betrayed him. I saw it in his face on the battlefield. And it's tearing me apart. Then he makes this statement, I will never be on the wrong side again. I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's worth seeing. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but he says, all my life I've taken the easy road. All my life I've figured out what do I have to do for me. And along comes this man, William Wallace, who looks beyond his own personal convenience and says, what is the need of my countrymen? It was so strange to me that for a moment I caught the vision. And then, Dad, you talked me into slipping back into the comfort zone of complacency and personal comfort. He said, and it's tearing me apart. I tasted for a moment what it's like to be a man of honor. And then I gave it away. And it's destroying me. Come on, man. Is there not something in our blood that when we read these stories that I can associate? Maybe some of you can associate with William Wallace. Unfortunately, most of us can associate with William the Bruce. Tasting moments of power, moments of purpose, knowing that we were created for something more than us. But the world comes in and says, compromise, get along, take the easy road, look out for yourself. And we betray that inner voice. We betray the nudging of the Spirit of God. And it tears us apart. He said, I will never be on the wrong side again. And then he took up he went to the men he had betrayed. He went to the men he had betrayed and said, forgive me and follow me. And together we'll make a difference. And he led Scotland to freedom. First chapter 17, verse 29, the children of Israel, the men of Israel, are hiding in fear on one side of a valley, or one side of a river or stream, and the Philistines on another. For 40 days, twice a day, Goliath would come out and challenge. Is there a man out there? Choose a champion. Choose a Gibor. Choose a mighty man to come and fight with me. And if he defeats me, we'll be your servants. But if I defeat him, you'll be our servants. For 40 days, twice a day this went on, and all of the men are cowering in fear, looking at the obstacle. And David is a boy, too young to go to battle. 14, 15-year-old boy comes out because his father says, take some cheese and bread to your brothers. And he happens to be there when he sees this challenge. And he looks around thinking, wait a minute, all my life, I've admired my big brothers, and I've admired these men of Israel. Always wanted to be one of them. And now I see that they're all cowering in fear. And David says, I'll do it. And his older brother Eliab took him and grabbed him and said, you're just a little boy, get out of here. I know you're just looking to be somebody special. And David answered, is there not a cause? Man, isn't there a cause worth fighting for? We see, forgive the expression, it's one of the few things I learned from my grandmother. We see our world going to hell in a handbasket. Everyone in this room is old enough to have seen changes in your lifetime, and the changes are not good. After a while, little boys will not know which bathroom a boy is supposed to go in, or what to do with the mood changes. They are being neutered emotionally in our society. Isn't there a cause? Do not the boys need to be able to see what a man looks like and how a man treats a woman? God made men and women, of course, but my message today is that on the aspects of masculinity, he made you in his image to be mighty men of valor. Remember what God told Gideon in Judges chapter 6? The Midianites had been more powerful and browbeaten them, very much like Scotland in the 1200s. And Gideon was threshing wheat in a wine press, not on top of a mountain where the wind can catch the chaff, in a wine press, hiding for fear. And God showed up and God says, hail thou mighty man of valor, the Lord is with thee. And Gideon said, who, me? Who, me? I challenge you to read the story. God transformed Gideon. There was something in Gideon's heart that he had rationalized why he couldn't or shouldn't or wouldn't. But that all God said is, I made you for more than this. I need a man. And you're the one. Men, Satan knows this. Satan knows that deep in your heart, God made you to be a man of valor. So what does he do? Jesus said, how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods. Rape, pillage, plunder, steal. If a thief breaks in, who's he going to go after first? The man. Because he knows if someone's going to stop me, it's going to be the man. So I'm going to take the man out first. Satan does the same thing. Satan goes into a strong man's house and first binds the strong man. Then he can spoil his house with impunity. After Jesus warned that Satan's about binding strong men, he said something amazing. He that is not with me is against me. He's talking to men. The context is demons. The context is Satan immobilizing men so that they cannot be the men God made them to be, to protect their wives and their children and to make a difference in the world. Then Jesus said, he that is not with me is against me. He that gathereth not with me scattereth abroad. Don't miss this. Jesus is saying there's a battle. There's battles out there. There's an enemy out there. There's a devil out there and demons out there who want your wives and kids. And they know the best way to get to your wives and kids and your communities is to get to you, to immobilize you with passions or with lusts or with habits or with apathy, impotency, to immobilize you with guilt and with shame and with sin, so that when the enemy comes, you're like Gideon hiding somewhere. But God, Jesus says, but deep inside, you're still a strong man. So if you will join me, take my yoke upon you, learn of me, I will help you to be the man that I made you to be. Robert the Bruce, after his betrayal, after the death of William Wallace, after recognizing I did it again, I took the easy road. I took the road of expediency, and it's tearing me apart. He made the decision, I will never be on the wrong side again. Before his death, William Wallace made this statement, every man dies, not every man really lives. God makes men what they are. My question to you, men, is what is God trying to make out of you? I did some thinking this week because I hadn't thought in this context for a long time. We're all products of our culture and our society. We're all kind of caught in a little bit of a current. How many of you can remember the old hymn books? And how many songs were about battles? Onward, Christian soldiers, marching us to war. Dare to be a Daniel. Stand upon a purpose firm, heeding God's command. Honor them, the faithful few. All hail to Daniel's band. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to have a purpose true. Dare to make it known. Here's one almost 300 years old. Am I a soldier of the cross, a follower of the Lamb? And shall I fear to own his cause or blush to speak his name, to speak out for Jesus? Must I be carried to the skies on flowery beds of ease, while others fought to win the prize and sailed through bloody seas? Every man here ought to read Fox's Book of Martyrs. Are there no foes for me to fight? Must I not stem the flood? Is this vile world a friend to grace, to help me on to God? Sure, I must fight if I would win. Increase my courage, Lord. I'll bear the toil, endure the pain, supported by thy word. You get the idea that 300 years ago, men were of a different caliber than they are today? Must I be carried to the skies on flowery beds of ease? You know what happens to a man who stops working physically? I mean, I know we're in a different culture, and I have a desk job, if you want to call it that myself. But you know what happens to most men as we grow in success, we grow in comfort? You know what happens to our testosterone? Starts dropping. Now, the good news is you can rebuild your testosterone, but you know what it takes? Exercise. Exactly. And having lived lives of relative ease, what happens? I'm what's called a weekend warrior. I used to be a lot of things, like athletic. When I hurt myself, I used to hurt myself doing work. Now I hurt myself moving. The point I'm making is men, not just physically, but you can use your bodies as a reminder. Physically, we grow soft. We get busy. We're less and less willing to take risks. We're more and more watchers instead of warriors. But God made you a Gibor, a mighty man of valor. But you're not going to get from wherever you are to being the strong man that God needs you to be for your family without some choices. Like William the Bruce. He benefited from all... Robert the Bruce, thank you. He benefited. He became William the Bruce. he got a little bit of William Wallace and said, I'm willing to fight and even die if necessary, but I will not be on the wrong side again. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? Would to God that men of our age would come to the same realization. I'm where I am in large part because I've made the comfortable choices, the easy choices. But while I'm making those easy choices, Satan is binding my spirit. Not to drag me to hell necessarily, but to keep me so preoccupied or so distracted that I don't recognize the ways he's trying to spoil my house.